Hi to everyone, I am Andrea Sbarile, PhD student at the University of Genoa in Italy, and I'm here to present my work titled Endogenous Monetary Growth Models and Overview. This is the structure of the presentation. I introduce some elements relative to monetary growth theory, and the argument relative to endogenous growth models will be traditional endogenous growth models, social status and economic growth, such to ethic approach, monetary policy and innovation, and Schumpeterian monetary growth model. And after post some conclusion about these arguments. First of all, monetary growth theory is an interdisciplinary field of research that analyzes the effect of monetary variables, for example, money supply and inflation, on the economic growth dynamics. This theory is born with two work of Tobin. One in 1955 was a business cycle model, the non-aggregative model, and the conclusion of this portfolio model was proposed in 1965 with its article Money and Economic Growth, that was an extension of neoclassical growth model that generally is not monetary to a monetary sector. The main results were Mandel-Tobin effect, Tobin paradox, non-neutrality of money. So Mandel-Tobin effect is described as follows. A rise in growth rate of money supply increase inflation. This means that rise also the opportunity cost to hold money. So rise the demand for financial activities, decrease the cost of capital, and so this is an incentive for accumulation of capital and economic growth. In Tobin paradox is relative to the role of money and capital as store of values in this model. Well, the K stars, so the equilibrium level in capital stock in Tobin model is lower than Solow model that considers just capital as store of value. And the third is non-neutrality of money because government could modifying the rate of growth money supply could affect economic growth. Different theories were developed in particular for the instability of Tobin models, for example, by Siba in 1977, because the Tobin model described as equilibrium that is a saddle point, so is unstable. For its conclusion about non-neutrality of money, for example, by Sidowski, and for neoclassical assumption, for example, in the Keynes-Wicksell model by Stein, saving and investment are not equal. This theory is grown with innovations in monetary economics and in growth theory, for example, with Kiyotaki-Rata model and the endogenous growth model. Technology in Swan model is like manna from heaven and positively influences per capita income growth in countries. The problem is that the determinants of growth are not explained in the model, so are exogenous. In the endogenous growth model proposed by Utsawa, Lucas, Roma, etc., capital can be assumed to have a constant or increasing, as in Roma article, return to scale, and the human capital accumulation, R&D, and innovation become fundamental elements in growth dynamics. Endogenous growth model with monetary sector were originally developed by Howitt in 1993 and Van der Plug and Alogos Koufis in 1994. I propose this second article because it's the most known. Increases of national debt and of public consumption in this model damage growth perspective, and inflation rises even if accompanied by a rise in lump sum taxes and by a constant rate of growth of money supply. Consider that some elements of this model is taken by Ramsey 1928 theory of saving. The model is divided in three sectors. First of all, we have household that is subject to maximization to extract the utility that is described by this equation, in which total consumption is linear with respect to total wealth. And I, in this case, is nominal interest rates, that is the opportunity cost to hold money, and M over P, that is general, the real cash balances. Marginal propensity to consume rises with the probability of that. The household optimize the allocation between good and real cash balances. This requires that the marginal rate of substitution between good and real cash balances is equal to opportunity cost to hold money balances, that is nominal interest rates, as we have seen before. The second sector is the proposed by the firm. Firms face a constant return to scale. The productive sector is describable with a Cobb-Douglas production function, and the knowledge of each single firm also secrets among competitors. The third sector is the government. Public consumer interest and public debt are financed by taxes, loans, and money creation. The product of the current value debt and the value of future public consumption must not exceed the product of taxes and stagnant revenue. So is the government budget constraint. Every sector is in stable equilibrium, and labor market is perfectly cleared in money and in demand and supply. In this model, debt neutrality is valid when there is no entry of new generation of households and the neutrality rate is zero. The growth rate is so the product of the marginal propensity of saving and of the capital output ratio minus the capital depreciation rate. This condition is defined as Harrod-Domar rule. Given this rule, a higher private consumption implies a lower share of investment and thus a lower rate of growth of the capital stock. Conversely, high interest rates induce households to save and postpone consumption. The growth rate of per capita balance of the economy depend only on economic policies, as the government is able to influence marginal capital productivity, for example, with innovation, infrastructure, etc. So per capita growth does not depend on the type of changes in taxation and public debt, but decreases as households become more impatient and the degree of learning increases. Balancing inflation depends on an average of all future monetary growth rate, and this is not dependent by budgetary policies. In a Ricardo world, inflation and nominal interest rates increase by exactly the same amount of monetary growth because the share of national income for private consumption and so the share of investment and real growth rate are not affected. As long as the neutrality is achieved, monetary growth does not affect the share of consumption and private investment, national income, or real growth, and is therefore the only determinant of inflation. Moreover, government consumption does not affect real growth with inflation rates either. Increases in monetary growth are not neutral in two ways. First of all, growth rate of the economy increases and inflation. Then the second is inflation is not entirely a monetary phenomenon, differently by the Friedmanian idea that inflation is just and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. The second argument is social status and economic growth that is based on Chan, Shea, and Lai that propose a cash in advance monetary model in which elements as R&D, technological innovation, market structure, and the status of economic agents contribute to economic growth. More precisely, in the model, the position within certain social classes leads to a greater tendency towards capital accumulation because individuals are concerned about their social status in a market economy in order to publicize their wealth and thus achieve social position and power. And this is based on the Weberian idea proposing Protestant ethics and spirit of capitalism. This is the maximization of the infinite leaf agent that is subject to these three constraints. The second agent of this model is the government. State issues money at the rate Q and distributes energy to the agent in the form of lump sum taxes. The production function takes the form of AK technology as an engine of sustained growth. The rate of inflation is determined endogenously as follows. You can see that the lambda in this case is a cost variable. And when beta is higher than zero, so where capital stock offer direct benefits, the economy will show a sustained growth. An increasing growth rate of money has a positive effect in long-term growth rate. So money is not neutral in this model. But we have two constraining effects. First of all, a permanent increase in the rate of growth of money supply depresses real cash balances, which reduces consumption demand through the CIA constant. The second is that capital accumulation promotes higher social status. When the pursuit of capital accumulation is partly for the benefit of the welfare of individuals, a permanent increase in growth rate of money leads to an increase in stationary level of the share capital. That is the case in which money Tobin effect prevails. And when we have AK production technology, an increase in the rate of money growth stimulates the steady state growth rate of social capital. The third argument is related to such theoretic approach based on Kiyotaki-Wright model, in which inflation operates through a consumption effect in the decentralized market. A higher rate of inflation increases the cost of holding money and reduces consumption in the decentralized market, which requires the use of money for transactions. So the demand for capital decreases, causing a reduction in factor accumulation. You can see that some authors like Chu, Lai, Liao, etc. has produced many papers about this argument. In each period, households enter in the decentralized market for the first time, and they consume or produce goods based on the specialization of individuals. In this market, every exchange happens randomly, and so money becomes essential, differently by the harm problem. Once the trade cycle within the decentralized market is complete, households consume and produce generic goods in the competitive market. Well, households consume the same amount of generic good in the competitive market, regardless of their capital and money holding, and enter the centralized market in the following period with the same available of the two factors. In the decentralized market, a household become either a buyer or a seller or does not participate. There is a distribution of probability that we are in one of these three states. The marginal advantage of holding money is the product of marginal utility from being able to consume special goods, and the second, the marginal utility from the transaction of money on both markets. The second effect relative to marginal benefit of holding capital is the product of marginal utility for spending on general good in the competitive market, and the marginal utility to having to do less work in the production of special good. Since higher inflation increases the cost of holding money, we will see a reduction in real money balances held by households and in the value of goods traded in the centralized market. As a result, the demand for capital will decrease, reducing the growth rate. In conclusion, we have the following four effects. First of all, higher role of growth money reduce the consumption capital ratio in the centralized market, increase the consumption capital ratio in the competitive market, decrease the labor supply in competitive market, and depresses the economic growth. The first and the fourth effect damage welfare, while the other two cause an improvement. Despite this apparent ambiguity, and higher growth of the money is indeed detrimental for social welfare. In other words, reduction in the growth rate of money improves well-being. We can also see an estimation of the effect of endogenous and exogenous pattern in this figure, and we can see that in case of inflation is equal to zero and the Friedman rule, the endogenous growth effect of welfare are higher than exogenous growth. We have to remember that the difference in the welfare cost of inflation between the two models is increasing the size of the change in the growth rate of money. Now we are in the part about monetary policy innovation, and it is relative recent, this literature. This model, the first model, was proposed by Moran and Crialto, and proposed that innovation take the form of new varieties of intermediate goods, which are discovered endogenously as a result on R&D activities by private innovators that are in monopolistic competition. Agents who adopt competitive technology use resources to convert these inputs into technologies available for the production. The profit of owning and managing a new variety of intermediate assets is the key factor of technological adoption and innovation. Each producer simply buys production, differentiates production to minimize cost, and sell it to the end users. And the central bank set the nominal interest rates using this Taylor rule that you can see is described by this equation. In particular, the output gap is the ratio between output at current prices at output in case of perfectly flexible price and wage, and delta that is an exogenous monetary policy shock. R&D activities could not only reflect the poor intervention, but also the role in facilitating the implementation of existing innovation. This characteristic of the model is very important for achievement of realistic dynamics effect of R&D on total factor productivity. In the model, I introduced the adjustment cost for the level of both R&D and adoption of the technology. The model suggests in conclusion that monetary policy can have a significant influence on the medium-term productivity dynamics through the impact of monetary policy on technological innovation and technology adoption activity, and consequently on total factor productivity. The second model is proposed by Chu, Lai, and Liao, and analyze the effect of protection of intellectual property right on monetary policy effect on R&D. The protection of intellectual property right influences incentive for innovation, fostering an increase in the technological factor and thus economic growth. Intellectual property rights determine the market power of the firms and influence the growth and welfare effect of monetary policy. They also develop monetary growth model with R&D and in presence of elastic labor supply. We have the maximization of utility by households in an equation that is really similar to someone that we have seen. Each industry is occupied by a monopolist who rents capital to produce intermediate goods. The author introduced the patent as a policy variable, assuming that the unit cost of production of imitation products increases with the necessary innovation on the same product to obtain a product with its own patent. That is the definition, legal definition of patent breadth. Thus, without sufficient patent protection, the presence of monopolistic profit attracts imitation. Contrary, stronger patent protection allows the monopolistic producer to charge more margin without the threat of imitation. In this case, patent breadth is also the ability of the company only to increase the prices, so is the maximum achievable markup. With a larger margin on the markup, increasing the amount of monopoly profit can improve the incentive for investment in R&D. A greater amount of profit in a monopoly regime increases the value of invention, raising wages through the zero profit condition in R&D sector. The higher wage rate increases the labor supply given a constant share of labor production income. Therefore, the patent breadth on patent has a strictly positive effect on R&D and economic growth. Monetary expansion increases the nominal interest rates, which in turn increases the cost of consumption compared to leisure time. Reduce the labor supply. There is a partially positive effect on welfare. However, the increase in leisure time reduces the labor supply in the R&D sector and is detrimental for welfare. Despite these conflicting forces, generally, social welfare decreases as a result of an increase in growth rate of money due to the positive externalities of an R&D in Roma model and the CIA constant. R&D and labor supply are below the optimal equilibrium. In other words, a greater market power of firms means that monetary policy has a greater effect on both welfare and economic growth. The last argument is Schumpeterian monetary growth model, proposed by Chu, Kotze, Furukawa, and Liao, is relative to the Schumpeterian theory of creative destruction, in which we have the policy proposed by innovation in industry that can sell the firms that in the market are not innovative. The study is developed in a Schumpeterian framework with endogenous entry of heterogeneous companies to analyze the effect of monetary policy on economic growth through a cash in advance constant on R&D investment. In the particular case of an entry cost equal to zero, an increase in nominal interest rates decreases the allocation to R&D, innovation, and economic growth. However, in the general case of a positive cost of entry, monetary policy affected the distribution of implemented innovations. In particular, an increase in nominal interest rates reduces R&D and increase the time necessary for innovation. The resulting higher value for invention leads to a lower threshold of quality improvement beyond which innovation is implemented. We generate a positive effect on economic growth due to more inputs. So an increase in nominal interest rates would have the opposite effect on economic growth if the cost of entry was sufficiently large. There is an inverse relation between inflation and economic growth, but that the effect of inflation and welfare reveal a positive relationship between inflation and social welfare, unlike some previous models that we have seen. An increase in nominal interest rates reduces the threshold of quality improvement for incoming firm. The resulting decrease in the prices level of intermediate goods stimulates demand and increases the production. Increasing in output leads to a higher consumption, thus generating a positive effect on welfare, and this positive effect dominates other negative effect of inflation. Premiumization of labor supply, the scale effect in the model were eliminated. In the case of elastic labor supply, the scale of economy becomes endogenous and exerts and influences on the relationship between inflation and growth. The growth effect of nominal interest rates through this cash in advance constant on R&D continues to be present under the endogenous market structure because nominal interest rates that influences R&D incentives. So we are at the conclusion. I have proposed some argument relative to endogenous monetary growth in closed economy. Obviously, during the last year were proposed also, for example, extension to open economy and many model. And we've seen that monetary variable could affect economy in many ways. For example, choose between work, leisure time, timing of consumption and saving, innovation, etc. But the effect of these variables on the real sector is ambiguous. And also, the Friedman rule is not ever valid. Generally, this model rarely have supported the supernatural of money. We have seen just one case in particular. That was the first model. Um, also, if there are many production about this argument, generally there is not the supernatural of money. Maybe neutrality, but not supernatural. This model obviously are now in extension and probably represent, consider the proliferation of model, a field of research that's actually in development. So I finish my presentation and thank you very much for your attention.